Man, I've always dreamed of going medium format for landscape photography, but there have always been some pretty huge hurdles that have scared me off from doing so. The size and weight, the price, and is the image quality really worth it? I've done it. I've made the leap into medium format landscape photography, and for me those hurdles was not something I could maybe bend on. They were factors I could not ignore, so this is how I got around them. I've always considered medium format gear to be pretty big and pretty heavy, but upon doing some research I found out that the Fujifilm GFX50R and the 50mm f3.5 lens is very similar in size and weight to, say, my favourite landscape combination, which would be the X-T4 and the 10 to 24mm lens. These two combined, there is only 60 grams of difference between the two lens and body combination. Yes, there is a little bit difference in size, but it's nowhere near as intimidating as a lot of other medium format camera options are. Next up, let's look at pricing. So normally when you're considering medium format camera gear, you're thinking like 15,000 New Zealand dollars. Realistically, probably more like 20,000 New Zealand dollars. This is like, as a good day, a house deposit worth of money here. And it's just, for me, it was unrealistic. However, if you look at the 50R and the 50mm lens, you can get these on a good day for, especially if you wait for the cashbacks or some specials, for about 7,500 New Zealand dollars. This is still up there, but it is significantly cheaper than all the competition, and it's still a hell of a lot cheaper than a lot of full frame SLR camera gear options available. However, if you pick this option, you are stuck with the 50mm lens, and historically for most of my landscape work I shoot around the 18 to 24mm kind of range, and while 50, the equivalent works out at about 40, it is not that same wide angle look. So an easy way to get around this is just to do a 3 or 5 shot panorama. Yes, this is more work, but it gets you the medium format quality and that wide angle look without having to break the bank. Actually, my biggest concern when jumping into medium format camera gear was how I was going to manage depth of field. So on a smaller sensor, it's easier to get a wider depth of field. F22 at 18mm, say, is very wide, and it's quite a lot easier to get everything sharp. I was going to be limiting myself to the equivalent of about 40mm, and I could go to f32, but on medium format is definitely nowhere near as wide a depth of field for landscape photography. This was a concern. One thing I wasn't expecting to be so obvious, so nice, is with medium format, it's not like things are out of focus or sharp. There's not like this hard defined edge of what is sharp and out of focus with that depth of field. It is far more of a gradient, and so something in the foreground or background, if it's just a little bit out of focus, it still has quite a lot more detail. So as an example, let's say you're shooting along this beautiful landscape of my arm here. Need to mow the lawns a little bit. I'm not going to do that. So as an example, let's say my arm is a landscape you were shooting along here, and on the smaller sensor, say this is out of focus and this is sharp, and it's actually quite a narrow difference, transition. That point where things are sharp and soft is very obvious. When you get to medium format, it's like this is out of focus, this is nearly out of focus, this is a little bit out of focus, this is pretty sharp, this is very sharp, and it's a far more transition, like a gradient. That difference between out of focus and in focus for your depth of field is far more gradient, transitional, and smooth and creamy, and it makes blurrier foregrounds and backgrounds nowhere near as obvious and nowhere near as distracting. Actually, another real disappointing fact I found for medium format photography, especially with that combination, is highlight recovery. Still pretty average, but to make up for that, shadow recovery is absolutely mind-blowing. You get those raw files just in Lightroom, and you can pull detail out of the shadows like no other camera even gets close to. The resulting dynamic range you can get from one shot is incredible. It's like bracketing 5 photos from a smaller camera, but you get it in one shot. Where this is quite powerful is if you're trying to bracket on a smaller sensor and you have moving trees or waves, etc. in your shot, these, when you're trying to combine them together, get very hard to combine. When you've got that one nearly HDR look that you can pull out of a raw file from medium format, this gives you some very powerful one-shot image editing you can do from a single file. Next up, it's not just the dynamic range in colors and sharpness you can get out of a medium format, it is how much you can sharpen and noise reduce a raw file. You can really push those files and still do a lot of sharpening and a lot of noise reduction and get smooth, creamy results. And finally, one massive factor for medium format gear is the ISO quality. Now, normally for landscape photography, I'd be shooting, say, at around ISO 100 to 400, not too high, and I'll just go a longer exposure. But when you're getting into astronomical photos, and especially if you're combining the astronomical shots with, say, twilight or middle of the day, and you're doing those longer combinations, to be able to push your ISO up to 16,000, 32,000, 12,800 and hardly see any change at all is absolutely mind-blowing. That bigger sensor ISO performance is something full frame and crop sensor cameras cannot get close to. So I did it. I made the leap. I've gone medium format. And we're going to see how living with just a 50mm lens goes. But I am very excited to have HDR in nearly every single shot. The HDR look in every single shot. Personally, actually, after doing quite a few panoramas at 50mm, I really like the look of it compared to just, say, one 16mm or 10mm wide angle shot. I am very excited to make the transition to medium format landscape photography, and I'm so happy it did not completely destroy my bank account. Thank you very much for following along, guys. If you have any questions about anything in this or any other video, feel free to ask in the comments down below or flick me a private message. If you could send me a like, a share, and a subscribe. If you could send me a like, a share, or a subscribe, that would mean the world to me. I wish you all the safest future, especially with this coronavirus. I know it's scary. Stay safe, stay isolated, and I'll see you next week.